Welcome to the UVSS Finance 101 AGM video. My name is Caleb Bird, and I am your Director of Finance and Operations. In this video, we will discuss general UVSS financial systems, then dive into the 2019-2020 audit, discuss the strategic plan, and lastly, we will look at the 2020-2021 budget and talk about the financial implications of COVID-19. This will take us from where we are to where we are going, and lastly, how we are going to get there. Beginning with the basics, the University of Victoria Student Society is a not-for-profit student-led organization tasked with advocating for student-related issues. How do we do this? With the help of roughly 200 staff. This includes, but is not limited to, the Board of Directors, which is made up of 22 elected individuals. The Board of Directors is one of the main decision-making bodies for the UVSS. This is important because the final say of how student dollars are spent should be students. There are also 5 advocacy groups, 2 separately incorporated fee-levied groups, 4 affiliated organizations, 2 clubs, 40 course unions, 10 campaigns, and 9 unique businesses. This is meant to give you a sense of scale that we will be talking about today. To provide these services for students and offset the associated expenses, the UVSS generates money, or revenue, through multiple avenues, such as profits from businesses, space rentals, ad compensation, grants or sponsorships, and membership fees. The highest level and most intuitive place to start is the UVSS student fee. By breaking down the $76.85 that all full-time undergrads are charged, we can build off of this foundation. So with a quick review of the fee table on the UVSS website, which I highly advise you check out, you will see that this fee is split up into 15 subcategories, pun intended. The largest of which is the operating fund, advocacy groups, and building and capital. Of this $76.85, the operating fund consists of $26.60, which was $1,200,000 for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. This is the key revenue stream that allows the UVSS to run the way it does. For example, all directors, excluded managers, and our graphics department salaries are paid from this fund, just to name a few. In addition, our board of directors, outreach, and international student relations budgets receive their funding from here as well. However, this is also connected to our businesses. If a business runs a deficit, the shortfall will be absorbed by this fund. This leads us to the 2019-2020 audit. An audit is an official inspection conducted by an independent body to review the UVSS's financial controls on a yearly basis. The audited report consists of 12 main parts, but to keep things interesting, we won't dive into all of the details. The first portion provides a description of the auditor's opinion and the basis for it. So, in our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the University of Victoria Student Society as at April 30th, 2020. Then it discusses the purpose of the audit. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement. The report on other legal regulatory requirements is as follows. As required by the Societies Act of British Columbia, we report that, in our opinion, these accounting principles have been applied in a consistent basis with that of the preceding year. So now onto the fun stuff. So page 3 is our statement of operations. Here we have our revenue from membership fees, food, beverages, and other business sales. This is all then subtracted by our expenses and committed expenditures for the year, thus leaving us with a $606,000 surplus for the 2019-2020 fiscal period, which is an increase of roughly $304,000 from the previous year. A primary reason for this increase was the added revenue in membership fees due to continuing study students now being charged the UVSS user fee for access to our services. The next page is the change in fund balances. Here we have our 7 different restricted and non-restricted funds. For clarification, a restricted fund is where money for a specific purpose is gathered and placed until being used. The main things on this page to note is that our operating fund has a $242,000 surplus at the end of the year. We will circle back to this when talking about the budget later. Another thing worth noting is the Dr. Ewing Memorial Trust Fund has a healthy $337,000 surplus, and this is the fund we plan on using to pay for some sustainability upgrades, among other things. Overall, at the end of the 2019-2020 fiscal, the UVSS had a $1,644,000 surplus, which is an increase of $606,000. So this is good news. After a hop, skip, and a jump to page 15, we find ourselves at the impacts of COVID-19 section. Last year, the UVSS businesses, specifically food and beverage operations, were said to have one of their best years in recent history. As one could expect, having to shut down the sub for several months had a significant impact. So this COVID-19 section is where our auditors describe the pandemic and how the federal government responded. One of those response mechanisms was the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and thankfully our application was successful, resulting in 75% of our wages being subsidized for 6 weeks of this fiscal, which was roughly $189,000. This subsidy has been deducted off the salaries, wages portions of all departments throughout this audit. Despite the subsidy, the food and beverage operations at the end of the 2019-2020 fiscal period still ran a $75,000 deficit. This is due to several compounding factors such as minimum wage increases, new health tax, and increased competition. However, it's important to note that it is still $12,000 better than the year before. So great work last year's board and staff. Our other business operations completed the year with a $435,000 surplus. However, a majority of this surplus is due to the health plan revenue, which most does not stay within the operating fund. So really, other business operations minus the info booth ran a $20,000 surplus, which is still pretty good. So now onto Schedule 4, page 19. It's worth mentioning that this page in particular underwent significant changes due to feedback resulting in lots of the original numbers being broken out in an effort to increase transparency and understanding. Along the Board of Operations general column, you can see how much was actually spent from each fund. A few highlights are that the $4,500 worth of donations, which is comprised of $1,500 donations to the Unistoten Legal Fund and a $3,000 donation to help support the creation of open education resources. Last year, we also spent $18,000 on 7 different campaigns. We also spent $64,000 on our marketing communication expenses, and these marketing communication expenses were primarily the handbook and swag items, like water bottles and bags. On to the last page. Schedule 6, changes to trust balances. So on this page, we have the balance at the beginning of the year, the amount of revenue received during the year, and what the balance was at the end of the year for all the different advocacy groups, course unions, and clubs. The other category on here can be a little misleading, but suffice to say that it is primarily the transactions of all 200 clubs, course unions, and other groups like the graduating class. So that was the audit, describing what financial situation we are left with at the end of the 2019-2020 fiscal period. The strategic plan is a process of coordinating a clear and direct path for an organization to follow in an effort to achieve its goals. This year, under my direction, we adjusted the strategic planning process to create smaller, more focused group meetings to reduce participation barriers. We also emphasized designing a finished plan that would be more accessible to our membership. As a part of that effort, we created these helpful timeline graphics to set reasonable expectations and keep us on track. The results of this process was a concise and straightforward strategic plan, where we pinpointed clear goals and emphasized each step we would take to achieve them. For example, here's a snapshot of my strategic plan section. We have the main challenges, which is a summation of our environmental scan, where we assess the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the organization. As you can see on the table, we also have the goals, strategies, objectives, and tactics. And this is all meant to divide the overarching goal into smaller, more specific, measurable, and time-bound targets. This whole strategic planning process is done in conjunction with the budgeting. So we have the goals, the budget is responsible for determining how we're going to fund them. In its most simple form, a budget is a spending plan based on your organization's expected revenue and expenses. The global budget is a document that shows the priorities of the board. However, it is important to remember that it is a projection into the future and is not set in stone. A couple notable changes to this year's budget is that it now includes a brief definition and information section and has all three food and beverage operations, budgets, and audited statements separated out. So what's on the budget? Well, in short, membership fees net revenue is down. Food and beverage operations net revenue is significantly down. Other business operations net revenue is also down. Support and administration net revenue is down, which is actually a good thing because it is a cost center, which means that it always runs a deficit, and this year it is reduced. Board of Directors net revenue is up, which means a greater financial cost to the society. I can see how this would be a little confusing, so let's talk about the bottom line. Basically, there was and is no perfect way to prepare for a global pandemic. This year's net revenue minus expenses will mean an operating deficit of $180,000. The reduced student enrollment combined with less revenue from our businesses will likely mean that this will be the largest operating deficit in recent history. However, it is important to note that in 2015, the UVSS ran an operating deficit of $260,000, and within 2 years, the society was almost breaking even. And thankfully, as we saw in the audit, at the end of last year, we had an cumulative operating surplus of $242,000. So the accumulative surplus minus the operating deficit equals about $61,000 surplus at the end of this fiscal year. I want to leave you with a couple final thoughts. To be blunt, next year the UVSS will have a challenging time not running a significant deficit, and eventually, if the society owes too much money, tough decisions will have to be made. However, we are not there yet, and there are things we can do now to avoid this outcome. First, we hope the pandemic will meet a swift end, but because this is not guaranteed or necessarily likely, we won't be relying on this assumption. Instead, we are continuously marketing our businesses and thus maximizing revenue. We're controlling costs where we can and taking advantage of available subsidies. What you can do is come to the sub and support our businesses because the profits of which go right back into services for you. We're doing all that we can with the information that we have, so rest assured, actions are being taken. Your student dollars are in good hands. Thanks for watching, and please vote to approve the following motions.